Kyiv, April 2022. The British Prime Minister makes an unannounced visit to a country under active invasion, and among the equipment he pledges that day is a vehicle the British Army itself had already decided it didn't need. Retired from frontline UK service back in 2009, built on a design finalised in the 1970s. Armed with nothing heavier than a single machine gun, and within months, it's rolling through Ukrainian mud, doing exactly the job it was designed for 50 years earlier. Its name is the FV432 Spartan, and it belongs to a family of vehicles the British Army stopped needing before most of the soldiers now driving it in Ukraine were even born. But here's the question worth sitting with. Why would anyone send a retired, half-century-old troop carrier into the most intense armoured conflict in Europe since 1945? When far newer vehicles were available? The answer says something the newest, most expensive armor on Earth still can't fully solve. To understand the Spartan, you need the Combat Vehicle Reconnaissance Tracked Family, or CVRT, developed by the British manufacturer Alvis starting in the late 1960s. The concept was built around one core idea: extreme lightness. Instead of armoring a vehicle to survive a direct hit, the CVRT family was built so light, under 9 tons combat weight, that it could cross terrain heavier vehicles simply couldn't reach at all. 7 variants came out of that same basic aluminum hull, headed by the Scorpion light tank, and the Spartan was the troop-carrying member of that family, adopted by the British Army in 1978. Here's the technical layer, and it's genuinely elegant. The Spartan ran on a Jaguar 4.2-litre petrol engine, the same engine family found in Jaguar's road cars, producing 190 horsepower, later replaced in refurbished units with a Cummins diesel. Combat weight came in under 9 tons. Top speed reached roughly 80 kilometers per hour with a range of over 500 kilometers. Its aluminum armor was rated to stop 14.5mm armor-piercing rounds at 200 meters. A specific number worth remembering, because it directly beats the protection rating of the American M113, one of the most widely used armored carriers ever built, which was only rated against smaller 12.7mm rounds at the same range. But the real advantage was never really about the armor rating at all. It was about something almost nobody thinks to measure. And that's exactly where the Falklands War comes in, 4 years after this vehicle even entered service. In 1982, CVRT family vehicles landed at San Carlos Water as part of the British task force sent to retake the Falkland Islands from Argentina. The terrain across the islands was boggy, waterlogged peat that swallowed wheeled vehicles and even bogged down some tracked ones. The CVRT family's extremely low ground pressure, the direct result of that same lightweight design that made it seem underprotected on paper, let it cross ground nothing else in the British inventory could reliably move through. Reconnaissance and specialist teams reached positions using these vehicles that would have taken hours longer on foot in a campaign where speed genuinely determined outcomes. That same low ground pressure principle carried the Spartan through the 1991 Gulf War with the 7th Armoured Brigade and through peacekeeping operations across Bosnia through the 1990s. By the mid-2000s, nearly 500 were still in British service. Then, starting in 2009, the British Army began retiring them, replaced by newer, purpose-built liaison vehicles. The Spartan's story, as far as British planners were concerned, was over. Except it wasn't. And here's the open question this script has been circling since the opening scene. What changes about a 50-year-old design's usefulness the moment the terrain itself becomes the deciding factor in a war again? The answer arrived in February 2022, and it turned out Ukraine already had a head start most viewers don't expect. Long before the full-scale invasion, during Petro Poroshenko's presidency between 2014 and 2019, Ukraine had already purchased a number of Spartans for its own armed forces. When Russia's 2022 invasion began, Ukrainian crews weren't encountering this vehicle for the first time. Some units already knew exactly how to drive it, maintain it, and fight from it. Then came the wider commitment. On April 9th, 2022, during that unannounced Kyiv visit, the UK pledged 120 armoured vehicles, including Spartans, as part of a £100 million support package. Months later, in November 2022, a Ukrainian charity called the Prytula Foundation launched a public crowdfunding appeal, specifically to buy additional ex-British Army Spartans directly from surplus stock. The campaign aimed to raise enough for 50 vehicles. It raised $5.5 million, enough to fund 60. Ordinary donors, not government budgets, put a retired 1970s troop carrier back into a live war. But here's the truly surprising part. This wasn't nostalgia, and it wasn't a shortage of better options. Ukrainian forces specifically wanted this vehicle because Ukraine's own battlefield, cratered by artillery, crossed by unpaved tracks, softened by mud for months at a time, is almost a direct match for the terrain problem the CVRT family was designed to solve in the first place, decades before anyone involved in this war today was old enough to serve. Sit with that for a second. A design retired for being too light, too lightly armed, too outdated, gets pulled directly out of storage because the specific weakness that got it retired, low armor, low firepower, was never the point. The point was always whether it could go where other vehicles physically could not. Underprotected on paper, unstoppable in the mud. Now the harder layer of this story, because not every chapter is a triumph. Tracking of Ukrainian equipment losses through January 2025 recorded 17 Spartans destroyed, 4 damaged, and 2 captured by Russian forces. This is not a vehicle immune to modern war. Its aluminum armor, excellent against the small arms and mine fragmentation threats it was designed around in the 1970s, offers only modest protection against the guided anti-tank weapons and loitering munitions defining this specific conflict. Ukrainian crews inside these vehicles are trading the certainty of heavier armor for the certainty of actually reaching the position they're assigned to reach. If stories about retired Cold War designs finding an unexpected second life exactly where their original weaknesses become strengths are what you come to this channel for, subscribe now, because there's another one in the queue that follows almost the identical arc on a completely different continent. The comparison to the M113 matters here beyond just the armor rating. Both vehicles trace back to the same basic Cold War design era. Both were built to move infantry across contested ground rather than fight through it directly. Both were eventually declared obsolete by their original operators, and both ended up serving decades past that obsolescence in wars their designers never specifically planned for. The difference is philosophy. The M113 leaned on numbers and simplicity, over 80,000 built worldwide. The Spartan leaned on weight, an aluminum hull built specifically to weigh less than almost anything else that could carry a soldier into contact. Latvia has also delivered Spartans to Ukraine alongside the UK's contribution, and Ukrainian units have kept the type in continuous frontline service since mid-2022, well past the point most Western observers expected lightly armoured 1970s vehicles to have been fully replaced or written off. Subscribe if you want more of these stories about vehicles that got retired for the wrong reasons and then proved it, because this channel has several more Cold War designs whose second acts turned out to matter more than their first. So here's where this story actually lands. The FV432 Spartan was never built to win a duel against a modern tank, and it never claimed to be able to. It was built around a single, narrow bet that being light enough to cross ground nothing else could reach would eventually matter more than being armoured enough to survive standing still. That bet paid off in a peat bog in the South Atlantic in 1982, and it's paying off again in a cratered field in eastern Ukraine more than 40 years later, in a war fought by soldiers whose grandparents hadn't yet designed the vehicle keeping them alive. Retired in 2009, funded back into a live war by public donations in 2022. Still crossing ground heavier, newer vehicles can't. If you want more of these forgotten machines finding their moment decades late, the subscribe button is right below.